Hey folks, Michael Mann with Michael Mann Security Services, and welcome to When It Becomes Response. I know we stay away from that, but great case study today about what response really looks like. We're going to talk about the situation that happened at the Grace Baptist Church in Troy, New York. Hey, as we wait on our friends all over the world now, thank you so much. We appreciate that. To jump online and watch us, let's get over the admin stuff. All right, contact MichaelMannSecurityServices.com is our website for those of you that are just joining us, or if this is your second webinar. Seems like we get emails every week where new people are joining us from all over the place. So if this is your first time, MichaelMannSecurityServices.com. There's like 22 other webinars on our website. Go to our resources pages and videos, and you will see them. 615-606-1006 is our number. Give us a call if you've got a question, and that's Scott. He'll answer whatever questions you have. If he can't, he'll shoot them over to me. You can get Scott at ScottM, SCOTTM at MichaelMannSecurityServices.com, or you can get me at contact at MichaelMannSecurityServices.com. And you can always get us on Facebook or Instagram at Safe with Man. And most of the time, we try to provide an immediate response if you get us on Facebook. Expectations, we hope everybody is on now. Real quick, 30 to 40-minute presentation. I always say that. We run over. This is a good one. You're going to like this one, folks. There's some folks in the background back here that are really excited. All right, so 30 to 40 minutes. We're going to get into first considerations, some things to think about when we talk about response. We're going to get into the after-action review of what happened in Troy, New York, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this. Now listen, please. This presentation is not designed to criticize Grace Baptist Church in Troy, New York. That's not the purpose of this. This is an after-action review designed for your ministry's benefit. So you're going to see today what response really looks like what happens when your church security team has to respond, and not the gun piece. This is the most likely thing you're going to have to deal with. So this is an after-action what happens. So because we've got some friends here that can do all this stuff for us, they've broken this down through video, and we're going to get to show it to you, and I'm going to walk you through that step by step. Okay. This is not criticizing anybody. This is for your benefit, your ministry. And even if you're not protecting churches or houses of worship, if you're protecting a business, a workplace, this also applies to you. The principles of physical protection are all the same. It's just how we apply them, folks, in the different environments. All right. So considerations as we get started here. All right. So number one, remember, physical protection is about prevention, not response. Physical protection itself is about preventing something, and that is, number one, gathering intelligence about your adversary, about your protected facility, about information that you're getting. And number two, it's about deterrence, trying to convince the adversary not to attack your facility or psychologically impacting that motivation for them to actually attack your site. There is no true security without assessment. Here's what I mean by this. Church, house of worship, synagogue, mosque, temple, a nuclear facility, corporate office building, school, it doesn't matter. You must understand what threatens your site. You must understand their capabilities. You must understand their motivations. And so if you don't know those things, there's no true security. So you must know what you're trying to protect your facility against. Number two, this comes from Bob Oatman, longtime executive protection professional, retired Baltimore County major out of their intelligence section, and for the last, probably 30 years, has been teaching executive protection professionals all over the world how to do private protection or personal protection. It's not about the gun, folks. It's about the advance. What this means basically is it's not about the guns. It's about the planning that you do prior to. So the threats you identify, understanding those threats, and how you plan to deal with that if it were to happen. Okay? The police cannot protect you. The police cannot protect your church. Number one, it's not their job. Number two, they just can't do it. There's no constitutional requirement, number one, for them to protect any of us from any kind of personal violence. And number two, again, they can't anyway, and you're going to see that here today. All right? Nothing against them. I love them. Here in October, I will officially be a retiree from the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. I spent 12 years there. In October, I start drawing my retirement benefits. I train police officers now through a university, so I teach criminal justice. And I have still some very close friends that are police officers or retired police officers. So I have nothing against them. And I train police officers all over the country. But understand, I truly understand the criminal justice and police side. capabilities and what the job is, and I also understand this from our side, from physical protectors or from those folks that are protecting facilities and people. All right. What is response? So let's talk about response. We're going to get right in the meat of this thing. Response are actions taken by somebody to neutralize a threat. So what does that mean? Neutralize a threat. Does that mean the use of a gun? Absolutely not. Neutralization means we make something ineffective. That threat, we make it ineffective in some way. That doesn't mean that we have to shoot it, that we have to harm it. And that threat is that intent and capability of someone to do harm to something we're trying to protect. So response is someone's ability to neutralize our threat or to make something ineffective. Maybe that's us. Maybe it's something else. That could be on our force continuum, could be anything from calling 911 or calling somebody else to help, all the way down to the use of deadly force. We want to stay on this end of that, okay? When we talk about response, number one, here's the most important thing. This is what I was talking about with the Israeli security concept, part 2. We talk about field threat assessments. As a protection agent, a volunteer at a church security ministry, a volunteer security person in a mosque, at a synagogue, at a temple, folks, you have to make a decision. There's going to be a decision to be made before that actual response. And that decision is going to be, and you're going to see that here, do you allow somebody to have access if you've identified something? So a decision must be made at some point to do something, okay? Whatever decision you make, the next question that you want to ask yourself when it comes to response is, what is a reasonable or appropriate response? So if you make a decision, whether that decision was right or wrong, and then later on you have to respond, was whatever you do, that response, was it reasonable or was it appropriate? Okay? Because legally those questions might be asked of you later. And then you're going to be judged socially later. Okay? You're going to see some videos here that you've seen numerous times. And again, when these things happen, especially if they're captured on social media like everything is today, people are going to start making those determinations if it was reasonable or appropriate, and they may not be right. But still, there is a social, financial, and personal impact to your protective facility. What are your ministry's capabilities? So in response, what can your ministry do and what can they not do? Look, it's okay if they can't respond to an armed threat. There's nothing wrong with that, because I would tell you the most important thing for you to do is identify your problem before and prevent it. That's physical protection. But you do need to understand your ministry's capabilities. And again, you're going to see today it's not about the gun. The majority of as a private citizen, the majority of incidents that involve the use of force are going to be non-deadly. They're not going to be the use of deadly force. What happened in Texas last year at that church in December of 2019 is that, I mean, literally, that the risk or threat of that is minimal or lower than that. This is something that you're going to probably have to deal with. Can your house of worship live with the consequences? So if something happens, you make a decision, you don't make a decision, you're forced to respond. Can your house of worship live with the consequences or impact of what happened during that event? Okay? All right. So Grace Baptist Church, here's what I know about them. Not a whole lot. I do know that they have a presence on social media, so you can get online, you can get onto YouTube, and you can see the pastor that they broadcast their sermons every week, it looks like. Pastor appears to be open about what he believes the Bible says, which is awesome. It's outstanding. As believers, that's what we're called to do. You can see him in the street preaching from the Bible. That's an awesome thing. The church appears to be in agreement with the Second Amendment, which is another awesome thing, because we've got this thing called the Constitution, and there are these Bill of Rights that are really cool. Even though they're under threat today, that's a great thing to have. Now, here's what happens. So the day of this protest, the media hears about it, and right away they send out a tweet. Now, the tweet didn't say protesters attacking church. Protesters attacking a church that's preaching the word of God, that's preaching the gospel as told to them to do by Christ. It's the Christian thing to do. This church is a peaceful place. There's never been a problem with this church. Here's the tweet. Protest has erupted in Troy against a church that is doing an AR-15 giveaway. Why is that? Social impact. But they played this right away, the media did, like, what's this look like? It looks like that this protest is something that the church has caused, and that's not true. Okay? Heading to the scene now. I'll have more details shortly. So impact, all right? So media jumps on this right away, doesn't say poor church, doesn't say they're not doing anything wrong. Well, there's a protest because they're giving away guns, and I'm not sure that's the reason for the protest, Okay. So another consideration, understand your threat. Let's go back to last week. So if you tuned in last week, Scott, we did left-wing terrorism last week, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So understanding the threat. So you do need to understand your problem. Again, this goes back to Israeli security concept training. So understand the threat. Here's what happened with the protesters. Understand threat by definition, intent and capability to do harm or do something bad or undesirable to your facility. In this case, regional Black Lives Matter group decides to go protest at this church. Okay, it caused the church a problem, so it was a threat. From a security standpoint, this was an issue. All right. So here's what we know about BLM. We do know, based on the co-founder, that she has said several times that they are trained Marxists. If you remember last week from our seminar, this name or this group or our webinar should ring familiar to you guys. So we do know that the co-founder of BLM has been schooled by somebody by the name of Richard Mann. No relation that I know of. If you trace his name back, he was very involved with the Weather Underground in the late 1960s, which is a leftist terrorist organization. So, according to BLM, they're a Marxist organization. There's some sort of connection with BLM, at least one of the co-founders, and a leftist terrorist organization from the past. People that were put in prison for doing things like breaking the law and committing terrorist acts. So we know that. Okay. So if we go into understanding the threat, so understand what it is we're dealing with. We talked about this last week. We start talking about Karl Marx and his history. Karl Marx, we talk about the fact, really, so the writer of the Communist Manifesto, person that created that and wrote it. So Karl Marx, born a Jew, his father, who's an attorney in Germany, has to convert to Lutheranism because of anti-Semitism at the time in Germany. So he could continue to feed his family and practice law. He has to convert. So that had to have a huge impact on Karl Marx, who, as he was born and grew up in a Jewish home. At some time, he goes away to college. When he goes away to college, the original plan was for him to be an attorney or a lawyer like his dad. And then somewhere at some point, he is impacted and his thought process is changed by an atheist. Okay. When that happens, he starts to think differently. He ends up changing his major to philosophy. He ends up later on, after graduating from college, going into the media. He ends up experiencing a lot of things, writes his Communist Manifesto, And later on, as this thing grows, he starts to talk about religion. Understand, not just the church. So we're not just talking about Christianity. Our professional counterparts in security that are protecting mosques, you folks that are protecting synagogues, you folks that are protecting temples, understand in Marxism and communism, religion is the enemy. Marx even said this, that religion must be abolished. And here's why. Because in communism, the state is God. We know that's not true. There's only one God. We know that God is the ultimate ruler. I mean, we know that God is the ultimate person or the ultimate being of order. And he is it. He is the ultimate law. But in communism, you can't have that because it gives the people hope and because it puts the state in another position. And so because of that, the church or any religion in general is an enemy to communism and Marxism. Okay? So because again, the state is God, the state itself. And so because of that, the church, the mosque, the synagogue is the enemy. And so when we talk about this protest, was this adversary attack methodology. And not that this protester group was going to hurt anybody, but again, it was an undesirable event for the church. And so what does that mean from a planning standpoint? So understand the problem. What does it mean? Why did they do this? Why would they be there protesting? If they stand for what they say they stand for, if we start to put these connections together, this is why. Okay? All right. So let's get into the after action review, which you've been waiting on, to talk about the protests and see what happened. Okay. So we're going to talk about first, we're going to start on the outside because we think like the adversaries. So let's talk about what happened on the outside. So before we get to the first slide, let me talk about in the state of New York, what is disorderly conduct? So this is kind of like a brief overview of disorderly conduct based on the state laws. Number one, disorderly conduct can be anything that causes a public inconvenience, annoyance, or an alarm to a person or group of persons. It could mean engaged in fighting or threatening behavior, making unreasonable noises, being in a public place using abusive language or makes obscene gestures, willfully disturbing a lawful assembly or meeting of persons, and obstructs pedestrian traffic. So this is their definition of disorderly conduct. And disorderly conduct in most states is a misdemeanor, but that is a crime. That is a crime that is punishable by either citation or arrest. And if you're given a misdemeanor citation, you're being arrested, you're just being booked on the scene, and then you're going to be released because you promised to come back to court at some other time. Okay? So this is disorderly conduct. This is the law in the state of New York. So now we're going to watch the first video of what happened in the sidewalk. So here's what's going on. A regional BLM group decides to protest the church, right? That's their legal right, okay? Peaceful protest, right? So they show up, and it appears to be disorderly conduct. It starts to turn to a problem. So I'm going to show you the video, and you decide what's happening.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
The big microphone. Now look. I want to. So here's this protester that steps in front of this congregation, so blocking pedestrian traffic, causing a problem, and the security team member literally now has made physical contact with this protester. So what does that mean? So they're also kind of making it difficult for people to go up the stairs. Look at them following the pedestrian traffic. So really, if I look at the law in the state of New York, what does this look like to you? Yeah, what does it look like? So they're blocking pedestrian traffic. They're making a lot of noise. But also, I want you to go back, and we're going to point it out here in just a second. One that looks like appears to be one of the security team members makes physical contact with these protesters. Watch.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice!
Right here. Look at this. So he's blocking pedestrian traffic, and now a security team member physically makes contact with someone else, one of the protesters. Now, it looks like the protester is actually committing disorderly conduct, but I don't see any police. No one's making an arrest. Where are the police? That's another good question. Where are the police when this is happening? Okay. And so now we've got a security team member that has actually made contact with this protester. And so also, look, he's blocking these folks' path. So the security team member makes a decision, hey, I've got to get this person out of the way so our congregants can come up and go into the church. Okay. Again, look at the distance and spacing. We start talking about use of force continuum, and when do we have to make a decision to make physical contact? Look at the space or the lack of space in between these two folks. And again, there, it's still physical contact.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! You should be ashamed of yourself, sister! Taking your justice and millions of black kids! Why would you take every day?
And then you have this young fella standing there on the sidewalk, blocking pedestrian traffic, making these folks walk around him as they try to go up the stairs. So is this disorderly conduct? Have they broken the law? And if that's the case, where are the police? Why is an arrest not being made? Why is somebody not stopping them? Okay. And again, here you've got someone blocking traffic or blocking pedestrian traffic. What does that mean? Okay. So on the sidewalk, again, we talked about this physical contact initiated by the volunteer. So here's what we need to understand about, we start talking about response. Remember, I went back about response. What does that mean? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? And are you willing to accept the consequences? Or can your house of worship accept the consequences based on what the security ministry or the security team does? So what's the law in your state when it comes to private citizens and physical contact with somebody else? Okay. I can tell you this, in the state of Tennessee, before a volunteer or before a private citizen can use force against someone else or even make an arrest, a crime must be committed in that person's presence. Very specifically, a misdemeanor. For felonies, there has to be really good reasonable cause to believe that a felony has been committed. So there are some specific laws everywhere about volunteers and about private citizens using force. So think about that. What does that look like for you guys? All right. Do you have a use of force continuum? And understand the use of force continuum. If folks are on the webinar today, first time with us, if you've never heard me tell you this, a use of force continuum is a guideline that even private citizens can use as a standard for the amount of force that is reasonable in any given situation. Reasonable means the minimal amount of force necessary to overcome that opposing force. Always minimal. So are your security team members trained to that? What does that look like? You just saw it. Use of force continuums, folks, can be facility or mission specific. A use of force continuum for a police officer is going to be different for that private citizen, or it should be. All right. And then training and documentation. What does that look like for what you just saw for that security team member? Are they trained to do this? And can they answer a question? Are they willing to accept the consequences of what might happen? Okay. Remember, we're talking about making decisions also. We're going to talk about that next. Okay. So now we're going to talk about in the building. So they've been outside. So I want you to think about this. At some point, there's a security team out there. These folks have shown up. When we get into, I talked about this was the Israeli security concept, and again, field threat assessments, determining whether or not you're going to make a decision to let somebody come in or out of your building or sanctuary. So here now they're inside the building. Okay, so let's talk about that. So what's happened? There was this protest outside. There were some problems. Church security team member makes physical contact with one of the protesters. Looks like some of the congregation members are having a problem kind of getting to a path. So kind of a path is cleared. There's some loud noise. It appears, based on what we experienced here, what we observed, that there might have been a law that was broken. So in the building. So number one, again, what occurred outside? You got to make a decision based on behavior, right? So if you let that person or those persons in, and I'm not, again, here, this is a decision on a security team that I have nothing to do with. I've never even been in Troy, New York. So this is not any kind of criticism on those folks. It's something as we look at this, things that you guys need to be considering. Whatever happens, if you make a decision to allow someone to come in or not, are you willing to accept that consequence? Whether, again, you've given them access authorization, which means you authorize them to come inside the building, or you're going to say, no, they cannot. What does that mean, and how are you going to deal with it? Okay. So here, this is what happened in the building. Okay. So this is, I guess, after the service, the protesters are leaving. They're trying to be nice to them, and there's some bad language, and they kind of like verbally abuse the congregants for whatever reason. Now you're going to see up here in the left corner, another protester is videoing or trying to take a video with his phone of the sanctuary, and now it's turned into a confrontation because of actions from a security team member that went up to stop, and finally the police are in here now. Okay, so this is kind of what's happening, and it looks like a fight almost breaks out, and there's still some scuffling. It looks like at some point they're trying to get him outside the building. Okay. Now notice most of the protesters are leaving on their own. You see this guy here. He's trying to get him out. The police are there, but you don't see a whole lot of action from the police. There's two police officers there. What was going on outside with the police officers before this started? Okay, so let's kind of break this down inside the church building. So I've kind of showed you that video. You saw kind of a quick view of what happened. So it looks like there was a confrontation. The police were finally inside. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so here they are. They're leaving. The congregants are trying to give them some information and tell them thanks for coming. And if you pay attention, there's some verbal abuse again to those folks that are just trying to be helpful. And now look up here in the left corner of the screen. So the security team member is telling the police officer, it looks like, if you notice the guy in the camouflage jacket, now the protesters are leaving. So if they're leaving, what is happening? Why is there being footage being taken inside the sanctuary? And so a decision here is about to be made. So the security team member sees something. When he sees this, he points this out to the police officer. Okay. So he's on his phone. Why is he doing that? What does that mean? If they're leaving and they're done protesting, why is he actually taking photos or video of the sanctuary? Okay. And so again, we've already pointed this out. There's a security team member that identifies this issue. So again, we've let him in. You're willing to accept those consequences. The question I have, and the question that as security professionals we should ask about this video, if they're leaving, it looks like they're trying to get out, like they weren't trying to hang out in there. If they're leaving, why is he taking video of the sanctuary? Is it adversary attack methodology? Is he trying to gather more intelligence information? Is he trying to gather hostile surveillance while they're there causing this problem? What is it? What does it mean? Security team member sees that. Here or in your house of worship, what is the role of the security team member? Is it actually to go up and stop that person? Is it to call the police? Have you defined those roles for the security team member, especially in the middle of a response? And what are the expectations for the police? So in this case, the police are kind of standing by. It looks like the protesters they're leaving the building. They're trying to get out pretty quickly until this one guy stops to take video footage of the sanctuary for whatever reason. And then as the security team member points this out and the police start to step in front of this protester, and we're going to play some more video here in just a second, you see it starts to cause the problem. No right or wrong here, just questions that we start to ask and really what response is going to look like. And again, remember, the majority of your use of force as a private citizen is probably not going to be deadly force. It's going to be dealing with something like this. It's going to be the use of non-deadly force and the decisions you have to make very, very quickly. Okay? So here you can see he points them out, and the police officer now, so it looks like they're leaving. I don't know from this point if the police told them to leave, if they just decided they're finished and they're all going to leave. And it looks like, again, the majority of them are. But the security team member points this guy up here in the camouflage jacket out, and now what happens is the police officer now physically puts his hand on the protester. Now, again, I don't know if he said something to him. We can't hear that. But when the decision's been made to allow access authorization, and again, here we're not saying to deny or to allow, but are you willing to accept the consequences of what might happen if a potential adversary gets inside the sanctuary or inside that protected space? So here, now the police officer's put his hands on the protester that looks like he's taking photos of the sanctuary. Okay? All right? So now what's happened is you have the other protesters look like they were leaving. Now they've turned around because there's commotion, and now they're going to go back. And you're going to start to notice things happen very quickly. People start to move around. There's positioning, which causes a problem for the security team member. The security team member who's now had to deal with this, now his back's turned. Watch. Okay? So his back is turned, and now he's surrounded, and now he's assaulted. He's pushed by the protesters inside based on a decision. Okay. All right. And so now you have multiple protesters surrounding a security team member. He's in the middle of this, and you've got a police officer on the end of this. And this was, again, not saying it was proper, improper, inappropriate, don't know. Looks like they were leaving, and this started when the police officer put his hand on the protester. Okay. And of course, now it starts. Now you can see up here in the corner the security team member with the suit on now is being grabbed by a protester, by a couple protesters. He's being assaulted, and he's being confronted at the front. So he's being confronted here. He's being grabbed back here, and so he's got a problem 360 degrees around. Okay. And now the police are telling him to leave. Now the other police officer's finally coming around, and they're going to try to get him out the door. Okay. Now, if you look, consequence, folks, not just the consequence of social media, but now what's happened is look at the congregants. They're all having to look at this. Now all of their attention is away from what's happening up here in front of the sanctuary, and now it's to this mess. Okay. All based on the decision. Whether the decision was appropriate or inappropriate, it's not our call. It doesn't matter. This is what response looks like. What does all this mean? What is the impact? The impact is security team members having to respond, security team members being assaulted, the congregation now focusing on a problem that's happening inside the sanctuary. What does that impact have on the church? And they do. They start to leave. And again, there's some verbal abuse here as the folks are trying to leave. And there's the police at the end. Okay? Yep. Okay. In the building, we talk about response. Okay? It's not about the gun, folks. Use of non-deadly force is probably the most likely outcome for your church or your house of worship security team. What's the expectation for your ministry? Is your security ministry expected to respond to something like this? Are they expected to make physical contact outside? Are they expected to make a decision outside not to allow access to a potential threat? And what does that look like? Number one, what does that look like from a training perspective? Number two, from a legal perspective, if you're going to tell somebody that can't come in, which is private property, but what does that mean legally, and what does it mean also socially? What's the impact? Do you have the resources and training to deal with this? The majority of church security ministries that we look at, it's volunteers and resources are very limited. But this is what you're probably going to be dealing with. And so you have the resources, training, and ability to deal with this type of response. This is response. Today, this is an issue with us. As we know, houses of worship, and not just churches, are coming under attack. And it's because of an idea. And so, how are you going to deal with this? Remember, the police don't protect, they respond. This is what happened here. The police didn't stop anything, they didn't prevent anything from happening. I'm assuming they were called, the police showed up, and they were doing the best they could, but there was no protection here. They're having to respond also. And you can see how quickly, based on decisions made by the police, now something escalated. So you had people leaving. I don't know what he told the protester that was filming in the sanctuary or taking the video with his phone, but at some point he grabbed him, looked like pretty aggressively, and then it almost started a fight, okay? And remember, when we start talking about, you guys remember this last week from characteristics of terrorism, and like weeks ago when I did something else on terrorism, remember one of the characteristics or objectives of a terrorist organization is to try to instigate and to try to create an overreaction from who they believe to be the enemy. And that's exactly what this was. They wanted an overreaction. We're seeing this all over the place. An overreaction or doing something that's going to force you to overstep your bounds both legally and socially. So what's the impact, and are you willing to accept that? Okay? All right, folks, we're right at like 33 minutes. It's amazing. Not a lot here. Just wanted to show you what response really looks like. Probably not going to be the gun. It's going to be the use of non-deadly force. Now, remember, folks, any Q&A real quick before we get into this?
Not yet.
Okay. So, again, remember, what are your requirements? What are the expectations from the church? Can you deal with them? Do you have the ability? And if you don't, what are you going to do? It sounds like we got one question. Go ahead, Scott.
So Mike Phillips has a question. He says, seems to me that the police stood around doing nothing. How does that make any sense?
Yeah. So today the police are under a whole lot of pressure based on both legal and social pressures that based on things that are happening throughout the country. And so right now, and this is, it's always been the case, they're not designed to protect us. So right now, I think there's some hesitancy from the police to go in and actually make arrests because they don't want to look too aggressive. And this is the point. This is the point of what we're seeing. These groups are throughout the country. They're trying to kind of change the goal and the direction of the country today. And one way to do that is to break down law enforcement, to break down some of the governing officials that we have. So that's why you're seeing what you're seeing, and they're probably very hesitant to do anything. Again, folks, remember, this is private property. And so there's a lot of decisions made, even from the police. The police will tell you when they show up, there's certain things that we have to do to protect the facility. And if we decide that something needs to be done, that's going to be based on decisions that we make and what we tell the police. So we have to make those decisions because this is private property. It belongs to us, and it's not their responsibility. Sounds like we have another question. Go ahead.
Yes. Gary Banning, he says, if they were denied access, maybe the church was concerned about outside damage. How do you weigh that into your decision?
Yeah. So in field threat assessments, part of this is at some point based on intent and capability. So intent's what they think. And so this is based on behavior. The capability is going to be based on other things like what they have with them and some other stuff. But so, yeah, in this case, Gary, that decision does have to be made outside. And if you make that decision, you will have to figure out how you're going to deal with those consequences, like what's going to happen outside. But like if we're going to stop them and there's not going to be any access, yeah, we're going to have to deal with that. In this case, it's almost to the point, because a fight almost started. Would that have been a better decision? So you are going to have to make that decision, and whatever that decision is, you're going to have to live with it. And again, here, in this case, this thing almost blew up into something where, at the end of this, right now, I would guess more than likely, they probably wish they would have held them outside, right? And if they said, look, you can't come in, it's private property, then legally they couldn't come in. All right, folks. Hey, to our brothers out there protecting our churches, to our professional counterparts that are protecting mosques, that are protecting synagogues, that are protecting temples, if we go back, remember what Karl Marx said, is that religion should be abolished, not the church. It's all religion. And that is the goal. And so be careful, like be alert, be aware, be on your toes, be ready to accept the consequences of the impact of whatever your actions are. And always remember, it's about prevention. It's not about response.